Krieg hat mich enttäuscht. Der moderne Krieg entspricht nicht den literarischen Vorbildern. Gibt keine Pferde mehr. Zum Beispiel ist aber, als ob man einer großen Autoverkehrsstraße sich befindet. Nicht wahr? Es hat mit dem eigentlich Heroischen nichts zu tun. Also das Ritterliche am Kriege ist verschwunden.
The man you have just heard was a man named Ernst Jünger. He is seen here on the right, with his body facing to the side. Now, although he is somewhat known in Europe today, the name would only ring a bell in the ears of historians abroad. Speaking of history, however, today what we are going to look at is the point in Jünger's life that is most commonly known. That would be his years in the Great War. Because the war was such a significant moment in history, so it was for the then Ernst Jünger, who at this time was a teenage soldier turned officer in his early 20s. The technological advancement that differentiated the war from all the others was a key factor in making this war like no other. There were tanks, zeppelins, planes, and poison gas all used for the first time in an unprecedented trench warfare plagued by stalemate. What this meant was that it was often the case that it was a 20th century war fought by 19th century minded soldiers and generals. It was in these trenches that Jünger experienced firsthand the violent nature of warfare, surviving multiple bullet wounds including one to the head. His bravery and performance did not go unrecognized, as he received the prestigious Iron Cross as well as the Pour le Mérite. Unfortunately, however, Jünger was also one of those who anachronistically fought with outdated expectations on what war was like. This contradiction between expectations and reality of the modern war experience is what we will focus on. And, like any good story, we will start where we ought to, the beginning. If you paid attention in history class, you will remember that the decades of tension among the monarchies finally came to an exploding point in 1914 with the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. Now, that's on the global scale. For Jünger, his childhood was filled with adventure books creating an idealized image of what fighting in a war would be like. As he grew older, he began to seek the very same thrill he had always read about, which led him to illegally joining the French Foreign Legion, which almost landed him in jail. He was forced back into a life of mundane and trivial tasks, and since he was a school dropout with no job prospect, the future seemed bleak. Therefore, when war broke out, that was his chance for adventure.
Er wollte endlich das, was er in der Ilias gelesen hat und im rasenden Roland, er wollte endlich den Kampf als inneres Erlebnis, so heißt ja ein späteres Buch von ihm, tatsächlich durchleben am eigenen Leib. Und er konnte sich damals natürlich nicht vorstellen, dass es dann zur Materialschlacht entarten würde, dass dieser Krieg der Millionen Opfer kostet. Ein Agon war, wie in der Ilias beschrieben, sondern ein Massenschlachten, in dem der Einzelsoldat eher unterging und einfach nur ein unbedeutendes kleines Rädchen im großen Getriebe des Generalstabs war.
This failure to live up to the expectations of a glorious war was the cause for this disappointment in regards to what the war had to offer. For Jünger, who was stuck fighting in the trenches, he realized that the war was lacking in two things. On the one hand, the metaphysical ideals that he had always read about as a child were all but gone. This was no holy war. Amongst the machines of battle, there were no aesthetics to it. War had lost its spirit, whereas materialistic goals was a component of ancient wars. In this one, there was all there was to it. On the other hand, the role of the warrior had been replaced by the role of the mechanics. The human component, such as intuition, was now outdated, because the machine was no longer an extension of man, but the other way around. Jünger concluded that much of this failing was thanks to technology. Whereas before, man could not rely on complicated software and machinery, the soldier had to rely on his own intuition, and creativity was required. However, as technological advancement turned the art of war into more of a science, the courageous warrior was now redundant and had to bow to technological supremacy. Thus, the obedient labor was needed to operate the machines. By the time World War II came about, all his suspicions were confirmed. It was no longer a matter of how one could fight, which was what Jünger had hoped for growing up, but rather how one could operate the machines that did the fighting. In Jünger's words, World War II was the war in which the technician finally won over the soldier. This was the new order of warfare, in which war is now dehumanizing and where mass casualty events have become really cheap. A couple semi-trailers full of drones with small explosive charges and a programmer to tell the drones to fly towards the eyes is all it takes to bring a major city to its knees. Whatever hopes of a romantic war that Jünger had growing up as a child, the muddy trenches of the First World War killed much of it, and the Second World War was the final nail in the coffin. This war too saw its fair share of new technological killing machines, designed to kill us in more sophisticated ways. From the V1 and V2 that led to the first man on the moon, from the splitting of the atom that led to the first usage of the nuclear bomb, not even man was able to escape the industrialization of warfare, for he would become part of the war machine itself. For instance, he would become paratroopers for the first time in this war, and the most prime example of a world where a machine was no longer a mere extension of man was the kamikaze pilots. The kamikaze pilots was perhaps the first time in military history when man became an extension of the machine. The world was now a machine and war had lost its supposedly human element, and the people became what he called the worker, an archetype defined by total submission to the machine and industrial society. Of course, one can argue that war has always been dehumanizing. These types of people talk of those who sacrifice their lives in war so as to help end the conflict of the moment and so that others can go home alive and in one piece. And while this is correct, this is nowhere near the point that I'm trying to make. When I say that technology is making war inhumane, I am not referring to humanitarianism but the concept of being human. Humanitarianism is defined by the advocacy in both rhetoric and action to help the well-being of humans all across the world. While war has always been anti-humanitarianism, I'm here in this video making a different point altogether, that it is dehumanizing in that the human experience, which is the degree to which man was involved in the conflict, has been reduced to a mere pusher of buttons that activate a drone strike, for example. What I meant by dehumanizing is that the human component is no longer needed. In the past, a soldier had to wield his entire arm by harnessing his entire body to the movement in order to harness the power of a sword. Thus, the soldier became the sword in a way in which his human aspect, such as body mass, skills, courage, were integrated into the sword. However, somewhere along the way, such traits of man became less in demand, and what counted was whether or not a soldier can press a button to execute a drone strike. All of a sudden, swordsmanship and the like is not needed. Man is not integrated into the machine in a harmonious way in which both parties enhance each other. Now, man becomes an extension of the machine, pressing buttons to attack an enemy far away. Now, in regards to this, some have pointed out that most warfare is still conducted by humans on the ground, in which the human component is still very relevant. They give examples of how most fighting soldiers still need to make good use of their mind and body in order to increase their odds of success and survival. And while swordsmanship may be a thing of the past, the same could not be said for things like marksmanship, in which strength, skill, and courage are still important factors. Indeed, shooting a moving target from 500 yards away takes skill, and it still takes courage as well when that target is shooting back at you. Loading 155mm artillery round into a gun takes strength and so on and so forth. However, these appeals to factors like skill and marksmanship, as well as courage, isn't necessarily what constitutes the human component that Jünger had longed for. If the skill and expertise was dedicated towards pressing a button in order to make a drone strike, then while it does require skill, it would not be considered human, for this is not the role of a warrior but of a technician. For warriors, even though obedience and servitude is required, they still had to apply their skills for human-powered devices like arrows and catapults. What needs to be understood is that human skill is not what constitutes whether war retains its human element or not, rather it is what the skill is applied to. By asking if it is applied to the warrior or to the war machine, the reality of modern war will become clear. A similar and better counterpoint is the sapper. Sappers were responsible for clearing the battlefield from the mines left by the enemy. They would use a little disc attached to a pole and would search the deserts of North Africa during World War II and the fields of Europe during World War I. The reason why this is a great example is because this involved the human to a high degree. When all you have is a magnetic detecting frisbee attached to a stick, you're going to have to rely on your human intuition just as the soldiers of the past had done in wielding a sword in close combat. Though the metaphysical idea was still gone, with the exception of course, ideologies, the first sappers were at a frontier still unsettled by technology, and thus the human element was a requirement. In this moment, this skill was not relying on some button-pushing technology. There was no such thing as technical errors, only human errors, and thus there was no such thing as technological success, only human success. The example of dogfights also has a human aspect, as they are now in close range to their enemy. It's a personal battle, sometimes even one-on-one. This involves much more of the human element than, say, an artillery shell from a distance loaded and fired by a man you can't even see. However, what's more is that unlike sappers, there was actually clear metaphysical ideals. It's not an accident that dogfights were compared to the knights in shining armors who romantically rode a horse into battle and fought with their human ingenuity. Indeed, before the planes were equipped with methods of mass bombing, much of this medieval analogy rings true. Therefore, it had come to my attention that the dogfights between fighter planes was a testament to the fact that even though technology automates much of what was once dependent on humans, it can, at the same time, open up new frontiers of battle, frontiers that are still untapped by mass industrialization and still require human expertise in its absence. As we can see, this perspective on technology can give hope to Jünger's pessimism about warfare. However, by and large, while technological mass mobilization can and did open up new frontiers, it can openly open up much more through the negation of technology. For the war in the skies to have its human element, the war on the ground had to be mechanical, and it was only through the mechanization of the sky were we able to open up the possible war in the universe beyond our planet. But to his credit, I think it is safe to say that Jünger did a damn good job comprehending the complex and often contradictory phenomenon known as the 20th century, where man finally lost to the machine.
Daneben der Stahlhelm eines englischen Offiziers, der mich an der Westfront angegriffen hat. Er bekam einen Schuss durch den Kopf. Leider ist er gefallen. Ich habe das immer wieder bedauert. Ich habe hier noch seine Feldflasche hängen und andere Andenken.